So, Dennis, you are the host of the Anxiety Guy podcast and the Health Anxiety Show, and also the creator of End the Anxiety Program and Life Mastery Program. How did all this get started?
Ooh. I think that in this life, we're always looking for our purpose. We're always looking for a particular mission. In my world, I was always looking for a deeper meaning, a deeper reason for being on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And I start to ask myself, life has to be a little bit more than what it is at the moment. And so where do I want, the direction for my life to go? And I had experienced an anxiety disorder for half a decade. And my anxiety, my stress, and then transitioning to anxiety started very, very young. It started at the ages of 6, 7, 8. And if I dig deep enough, I can probably say that it started even before those ages. So the programs and the podcasts were all a manifestation of me asking myself, hey, how can I contribute to other people's lives? How can I make my life have some meaning behind it? And it was born. There was a trial there for a couple years to see if people were actually interested and going to listen to me. And I found out that when you can become personal with these people, and when you can provide a service to them and listen to them and provide them with tools that are practical, many times they will listen and follow you. So really, it came out of lots of analyzing, lots of analyzing my own life and how I could create some kind of a meaning behind my existence.
This is really important for our listeners because you basically learned from your struggles and find meaning in that to help others.
Exactly.
Great. So today, after these couple of years helping people, healing their anxiety, we are here today to explain to our listeners causes, symptoms, and practical ways to cope with the daily stressful life. So let's start by a definition. How do you define anxiety for you?
I think what's important is to not mix up stress and anxiety. Stress is something that is very common in our daily life, and is a natural response that we have, to become stressed within a moment. You'll notice that the part of our brains related to what's called the reptile brain is responsible for our survival. So our ancestors would run from a saber-toothed tiger and would escape, hopefully, or fight something. And therefore, because they were able to complete the cycle of fight or flight, they weren't traumatized by the experience, and they didn't feel the need to overly worry about the next scenario that might show up. Anxiety can easily be defined as taking a situation and over concerning yourself over it, over worrying yourself over it, to the point where you begin to experience psychological, physiological, emotional symptoms based on your emotional reactions to a situation. So anxiety is constant brooding. Anxiety is taking something that in the big picture is very minuscule and can easily be dealt with if we had a clear mind. But taking a situation and catastrophizing it to the point where it begins to overtake everything that you do throughout the day. And you'll notice with anxiety sufferers, much of their day is spent internally brooding over the next possible catastrophic situation that will arise, rather than the, let's call it, average person who experiences a stressful event, but is able to keep that as a moment prior to moving their attention and their focus onto the next thing that's going on outside of them.
Mm-hmm. So is it the worry about a past or a future situation?
It could be both.
Both.
Now, in my personal experience working with many people, people are overly concerned and anxious about a future scenario because of what has occurred in their lives in the past. This idea, this mechanism within us called the fight or flight response, many times we don't really understand it. There is a third part to it called the freeze response. Now, if you have an experience when you were 6 years old, 7, 8 years old, and in that experience, you weren't able to discharge the energy within you. You weren't able to fight the bullies. You weren't able to verbalize something within you to mom or dad. And instead, you were stuck in a freeze response, meaning you were helpless, you were hopeless. That experience, that memory, gets stored within the subconscious mind and the body of the individual. So later on in life, if there's a particular situation that it resembles that past memory, that past experience, the person will involuntarily, unconsciously respond in a very anxious manner. Because when someone has these physical, emotional, mental symptoms of anxiety, many times we don't understand that those symptoms are related to a question. And that question is, hey, do you still want to keep the same meaning over this particular situation? Is it still a threat, or is it safe? And many anxiety sufferers don't have the tools or the mindset to be able to approach their anxiety in a way where they can begin to change the meaning. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is that when people begin to respond rather than react in a particular anxious situation, they're also changing their memories. They begin to, at an unconscious level, begin to change their perspective and perception over what took place in the past. No longer do they see it as a helpless, traumatic experience. What happens is they become more open to the information in that situation that they didn't have access to. Mm-hmm. So anxiety can be quite a complex process as far as evaluating it for the individual, but also providing focused, directed tools and the right approach for the person suffering from anxiety.
This is really so deep. Let's try to break it down a little bit. Sure. And what are the causes of anxiety, the common ones?
In my experience, and I've gone through certain studies with my own clients, I've found that anxiety today, present moment anxiety, is due many, many times, almost every single time, to undischarged emotion, undischarged energy that's lying stagnant in the body. And this undischarged, this inability to release the energy, to release the emotion, is based off of previous experiences. We call them initial sensitizing events, the first pie in the face. You come to this world and you see your authority figures, mom and dad, as your gods. They must be loving. They must be the definition of love. But all of a sudden, you see mom and dad fighting with each other, arguing.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is their argument becomes the template as to what love is. And all of a sudden in the future, anytime somebody is faced with the idea of love, let's say, they'll unconsciously go back in time, and the unconscious will let them know what the definition of love is, which in their world is anger, because they saw mom and dad fighting all the time. So now what happens is this person unconsciously sorts for love, meaning anger. So they're always angry. They're always anxious. They're looking for a relationship with somebody else that represents what mom and dad represented back in the day. So anxiety today is based off of past trauma. Trauma, which has and trauma, we need to understand, can literally be anything. Trauma can be getting your toy taken away from you when you were a kid. Okay, that can be highly traumatic for a 3-year-old. And I was working with someone recently, actually, where we were doing some work around hypnosis. And what happened was we found out after putting this person in a brainwave state that was very slow, she had access to her subconscious mind. She began to hear the voices of mom and dad arguing while this person was still in the womb. They weren't even on the planet yet. So mom and dad were arguing, talking about how they would not be able to afford the child. Financially, they were in distress. They were arguing over the fact that they couldn't provide the child with enough love because they hadn't gotten their own lives set up yet. Now you have a situation where this person is in contact with information that they weren't consciously aware of in their lives. But because of a couple of targeted exercises based around hypnosis, they were able to access this information and have it make sense in their present day. They came to this world thinking that they were a mistake before they even said a word.
Okay.
And because that was the case, in the present moment, 40 years of age, 45 years of age, they still see themselves as a mistake, and they see themselves as inferior to other people. They have carried this around with them all the way from being within the womb of the mother.
Wow.
And so trauma many times is stored at such a deep unconscious level that we cannot consciously access it. But it does show up through the symptoms and the signs and the signals that the body sends to the person as they're going about their present life.
Yeah, so this is lead to my next question is, what are the symptoms that manifest, like that our body sends to us?
Mm-hmm. So Symptoms can differ from one person to the next, but there are some very common ones. Okay, when it comes to the people that I work with, generalized anxiety, health anxiety, panic disorder, these sorts of people that have gone through doctor after doctor. They have gone through psychoanalysis, psychiatrist after psychiatrist, therapist, and they are tired of talking about their stuff. There is no solution to it. So they come to me and they tell me what their symptoms are. Many times the symptoms come down to brain fog, an immense amount of tiredness, chronic fatigue syndrome, dizziness, depersonalization, where you feel like you're living within a bubble, and you find yourself very much off balanced, mental, challenges such as concentration issues and memory issues. These, to me, are the most common ones that stick around, the ones that linger. But then there are symptoms. Yeah. Then there are symptoms that show up out of the blue, like heart palpitations, right? Mm-hmm. Those sorts of things as well. So there are the lingering kinds, but there's also the ones that make you jump and the ones that you interpret as being a heart attack or something more serious physically. Mm-hmm. When it comes to these symptoms, now dizziness, these sorts of things, I've found that many times it's like, and I've done this analogy before. It's where you recognize the old Ghostbusters movie. In the old Ghostbusters movie, they used to go from room to room, zapping a ghost and placing that ghost into a small box, right? Okay. And then they would go to another room and zap another ghost, put it into another small box. And then all of these boxes had to go into a bigger box. So when we zap the ghost, that's a trauma. We zap another ghost, that's another trauma, another traumatic experience, helplessness, freezing. And then all of those experiences went into a bigger box, meaning your body. And if the body accumulates all of these experiences over time, it's going to begin responding in ways to get your conscious mind's attention, to be able to do something about the situation, right?
Okay, this is a great analogy, Dennis. So let's say when someone starts feeling anxious, what is the first thing they should do?
There's a big difference, okay, between coping techniques, coping skill sets, and healing skill sets and techniques. We need to make sure that we understand the difference between what you're doing right now that's creating coping rather than healing. Okay, there's a big difference. On my YouTube channel, I'm coming out with a video soon on this particular idea. Coping techniques, are related to the world we live in today that tells you need to think positively. So positive thinking in this way, where you think positively in the face of a mind, a brain that is so geared towards survival, doesn't work very well. So a coping technique could be anything like, I'm going to be safe. I'm going to be safe. This is just a symptom. This is just a symptom. Mm-hmm. That's a coping technique. Another coping technique is keeping your support person around to help you to do everything. Go to the grocery store, go to the cafe next door to do your day-to-day activities. That's a coping technique, a coping mechanism. Mm-hmm. So there are many, many different ways that people cope with their anxiety. And what happens with coping techniques is it has the ability to help with the symptoms. Okay, it helps with the physical symptoms. It helps with the emotional and mental symptoms. But it doesn't take care of the root problem, the root cause that has created the anxiety. Now, healing techniques or healing skill sets on the opposite spectrum are things related to working with your physiology. For example, let's say you get anxious, and the first thing you want to do, which normal, is to run from the saber-toothed tiger or to fight back, is to do things very, very quickly, right? Go faster. Get it done so you can leave the environment. So a healing technique would be to oppose that direct signal to your physiology and to say, I'm going to oppose it by, in fact, slowing my speed down. When you slow your speed down, let's say you're verbally communicating with someone. Let's say you're slowing down how fast you're driving or walking or eating or whatever it is. You are sending a direct signal to your subconscious that this particular situation isn't a threat, but it's safe instead. Now, the subconscious takes that information and says, okay, well, I guess the meaning over this particular event, this situation, can be ticked as being safe, not threatful. So the next time the person is in the same situation, the subconscious will dig into its memory bank and say, what did we do last time? And last time the person slowed down and survived. Great, let's do that again.
Okay. Is one time enough?
No, one time is definitely not enough.
Okay.
The subconscious understands things through a history of success. Anxiety for many people is habitual because of how reactive they've been throughout the months and years of their lives. Anxiety is no accident. It's a buildup. It's a compounding of habits. So so a healing technique is something where you work with your body, work with your physiology to defy and to oppose what you normally do. That's a healing technique.
Change physiology.
That's one, and there are many others. Another healing technique would be, well, let me ask you this question, Ayub. When it comes to the garbage can, do you remember anything or the majority of things that you threw out in the garbage can? Do you remember it?
Not in the details, no.
No. So we have a pairing in our minds that anything that goes into the garbage can is no longer of interest to us, no longer important to us, right? So a healing technique would be to write down all your limiting and negative ideas onto a piece of paper. And for a 2-minute period going through that with the idea of releasing it out of your inner system and putting it onto a piece of paper, then walking over to the garbage can and slowly and emotionally beginning to rip up that piece of paper and placing the pieces into the garbage can little by little by little by little. Now, if you do that within the first 20 minutes of the day, when you're going from a theta brainwave state to a beta where you're becoming more aware and more conscious, then later on in the day, when those particular thoughts, those negative and limiting and catastrophic thoughts that you wrote down on a piece of paper and threw out start to show up, you will no longer be as interested in them as you might have been. Right?
So this is like a morning journaling exercise.
Yes, it's one particular exercise that takes care of the root of the anxiety rather than the coping mechanism. Again, you can see the difference between the coping reaction and the healing skill sets, the healing skills that you can bring with you in your toolbox each and every day. One can help with the symptoms sometimes, and the other one actually works at a very deep level to begin to change your associations to things, right?
But Dennis, this is, for example, won't help discharge any energy from the body that we had from like past childhood trauma or some other issues.
Mm-hmm. So here's the thing with healing, right? With healing, many people feel like when they go do a particular session with someone, a hypnotherapist or an NLP or CBT, they do the session and they feel like they're done, right? Like I did it, I put it aside, I worked on myself, great, I'm done. No. There are two parts to healing. Actually, there's actually three parts to healing. One is the mindset. Okay, you have to have a particular mindset, a general mindset that says, anytime I'm faced with a symptom, it's related to a question mark within me over, hey, do you want to keep the same meaning over this event? Is it still a threat? Is it still scary? So we have to make sure we are reminded of the mindset. Number two is we have to have healing skill sets as we're going through the day, right? You can't just go through the day and wing it, hope for the best, wish for change to show up, which most people do. You have to learn, you have to condition yourself on how to think, okay? People are way too caught up in remembering what they did before and not caught up enough in how to think through a particular situation. So number one is mindset. Number two is skill set in the moment of anxiousness. And number three is exactly what you described. It's to discharge the built up, the pent up emotion that is lying stagnant in the body.
Okay.
And
now,
the way you, and the way you do that, exactly. And the way you do that is, I'll give you an example, okay? When I was in, when I'm in a situation with someone where the first thing to do is to slow down the thoughts that a person's thinking and to relax the body, okay? Because when we can relax the mind and body as best we can, we begin to have access to that deeper mind, the infinite storage system within us. So now the person is relaxed. And now what I do, because regression means bringing the person back to a particular time in their life when the trauma started, regression. So what I do is I bring the person back to a particular situation when they believe is the earliest experience that has manifested the anxiety with them today. So the earliest experience. Many times they take me to a time period between the ages of 0 and 7. Okay. So now we're there. Okay. The person is in the environment, in the room, and so forth. Now, what's important to understand is that if you don't do this right, okay, you can re-traumatize the person. Because they, the last thing that they want to do is be face to face with the most traumatic thing that started the snowball of anxiety in their lives. So what I do is I bring them back to that time, but I bring them back in a way where they are their present person, their adult selves, looking in on the situation that's going on that they experienced when they were younger. So now they're the adult looking in. Okay, they see the younger version of them over there in the corner. They see their parents over there if the parents were involved. They see the room that they were in and so forth. Okay. So this is just one particular way to begin to do the very thing to begin discharging the energy. And that's called reframing, emotional reframing. So we bring them back. They are the adult person. And the first thing the child needs more than anything, okay, is a hug. Okay? They are helpless. They are hopeless. They are in fear. They are sensitized. They are overwhelmed. So I tell them, in that beautiful imagination of yours right now, I want you to go ahead and walk on over to that beautiful child, and I want you to give that child the biggest hug that child has ever received in their lives. And what starts to happen? Almost every single time, they begin to cry like they've never cried before.
Wow.
Okay. The energy begins to show up. It begins to become discharged. They are crying. They are sweating. But the child in that moment, since the mind doesn't understand the difference between what's going on in the external world and what's going on in the imaginative world, this person is imagining getting the hug that they needed in that moment. Boom, one small step towards safety.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then we go further along, and with the help of the adult support person, the child can begin to verbalize what they wish they would have verbalized. So go ahead and say to the person that what you wish you would have said in the moment. And they are punching the pillow beside them. They are screaming. They are, releasing all that energy that was pent up in that moment. Right? Sometimes they even punch out the bullies at school, whatever it takes to get the energy out. Okay. So reframing is the ability to go back into a particular situation, a traumatic event, in a safe manner, and to project safety over the experience instead. Period.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You said you help your clients go to a clear state of mind and imagine that situation. How you get them there? It's like through breathing, relaxation.
Yes. Normally, the people hold a tremendous amount of tension from their neck and above. So to get them to that place where they're less thinking, they're less conscious, and they're allowing themselves to be absorbed in what we're doing, reframing. We start with the eyelids. And when you focus on the eyelids, I'll tell them, notice that your eyelids are becoming heavier and heavier with every moment that passes. Notice that heaviness is flowing from the top of your head down to the tips of your toes, and you're giving yourself permission to relax at a deeper level. When the system begins to relax, which anxiety sufferers don't ever do, they never take the time, or they believe that relaxing or slowing down is in fact going against what they need to do in the moment. They feel like they need to always be on high alert, always aroused, always doing something, filling their plate with more and more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In the hopes of releasing themselves of the symptoms and to fight another day. So to bring a person back towards memories and experiences that caused the anxiety snowball in the first place, we relax everything from the neck and above, and then that relaxation flows down all the way to the tips of their toes. We work with the breath. We make sure that the breath is much slower than what it normally is for an anxiety sufferer. We place them in an environment where it's safe to let go, because anxiety sufferers have a very difficult time letting go. They are so attached to the need for certainty and the need for control. And I let them know that in this particular exercise, in this environment, it's okay to let go and so forth. And Ayub, what happens is something very, very interesting. The missing pieces of information start to show up. It's unbelievable. Wow, I never realized that before. Wow, I never saw it from that perspective before. I thought I handled that years ago. No. Right? So that would be the starting point of being able to regress someone back into an experience, to be able to reframe the experience, to provide safety over the situation, and move forward in their lives. Because I'm a big believer that for the majority of people out there, you cannot move forward until you clean up your past. And I spend a lot of time cleaning up people's past.
Interesting. This is mind blown for me, and I have a huge respect for the work you do in helping others cleaning up their past. It's something that means a lot to me as well. You have provided a lot of practical ways today to cope and to heal with anxiety. Before we end today, earlier you defined the difference between anxiety and stress. Now, is there any relationship between anxiety and depression?
You know what's interesting that you bring that up? Depression can lead into anxiety, and anxiety can lead into depression. Okay. And I live my life through a couple of universal laws. One of those laws is the laws of transmutation, which means that in the process of change work in my world, if I were to attach the law to what I do, in the process of change work, the person will go through many different forms, okay? And when we're talking about forms, we're talking about someone who is stressed going to anxiety, anxiety going into depression, and so on. When anxiety moves into depression, I find that to be a very good sign of healing. And the reason being, because the person who once was anxious is no longer as interested in the same ideas that cause the anxiousness. So they are becoming more and more and more disinterested in the floating thoughts and ideas and the physical symptoms that are causing their anxiety, that they are now moving towards depression. And when we're talking about depression, we're talking about a place in a person's life where there is a gray area. There is a void. And I see it all the time because anxiety provides people with something. Okay, worry provides them with a sense of safety. Okay, and once that safety is, once the anxiety is no longer a part of someone's life, and they are able to see past the ideas and the formulas that are causing anxiety, and they move towards depression, now they have an opportunity to recreate themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Because I see, like I mentioned, I see depression as a very, I'm not going to say good, but a very opportunistic place to be. Because I tell people this all the time, Ayub. I say, stop trying to overcome anxiety and start working on creating a new identity. It's not about overcoming anxiety. It's about becoming someone different. Okay, that's what it's about. And when we take this mindset and we apply it to a person going through depression right now, they can begin to start seeing the light. They can say, hey, the universe doesn't like a void. It doesn't like emptiness. Mm-hmm. So I have to fill this current emptiness within me with something. Now, the question is how does this deeper mind understand? How can we begin to plant the seed and become someone new? Through images. The images that people create in their minds lead to the emotions that they feel each and every day. So if you want to create a brand new identity, begin to work through that beautiful creative imagination that you have within you, to begin seeing yourself in certain situations and different aspects of your life based on the identity that you want to create. But going back to the original, when anxiety turns into depression, again, opportunity. It's very, very easy to succumb to a feeling in the body. I feel sad, so I must act sad. I must be sad. No. I feel worthless, so that means that I am worthless. No. How it should go instead is, I feel worthless in this moment, and what sort of experiences and people have ingrained me with the beliefs that have led me to feeling worthless. Now you're starting to think rather than remember. Okay?
Dennis,
and this holds the key. Yes.
Priceless information. This is make me really curious to go and consume all your videos on YouTube and read all the material on your website.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you for being my guest today.
Very welcome.
Thank you for listening to the full episode.